Okay, so 3 ways that my sense of self is kind of messed up and disjointed and so on. I've been wanting to talk about it for ages, but it's also kind of gets into some sensitive stuff for me. So I've been procrastinating a lot, and I'm just realizing I'm never really going to sit down and work out what I want to say. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to read what I wrote to my psychologist back in May, when I first started seeing her, and I had like the first session and I couldn't bring up the topic verbally. So when she said, email me whatever you want, blah blah, I was like, okay, emailing her is the only way I'm going to be able to say it. So yeah, this is difficult for me, and it's one of the things that I think I feel weirdest about people in my real life knowing about to some degree. So, but like, I think that's part of the defense mechanism, is I'm supposed to feel insecure about it because, I don't know, it's, a lot of the things that go wrong with psychology are defense mechanisms. So I'm just gonna try my best to read this and not sound too unnatural. I will have to censor a couple of things, and I've made like some tiny little tweaks, but it's basically what I wrote to my psychologist. And yeah, I'm not good at the whole like reading from a script thing, so it's gonna sound unnatural, especially with the way I write. So I'll do my best, and then maybe at the end, if I have thoughts, I'll talk about it some more in detail, but I may also just get insecure and turn off the camera and go do something else because, yeah, okay, I'll stop talking, I'll just get into it. So, like, I'm censoring people's names and so on, so I'll try and read it as accurately. Yes, I know okay, calm down, focus, just get it done and get it out of the way, and that's how we won't have to keep telling people. So, said, hi, name. Thanks for seeing me today. Hope it's okay to email some more thoughts. I can sometimes forget where I was going in the middle of talking about things, and some things are a lot harder for me to bring up verbally. In particular, confusion about my sense of self is an issue I felt sensitive enough about that I've only really begun to bring it up in a professional, medical/psych context in the past year. My main concern is still demotivation and depression, etc., but I want to try to be more open about this as well in case it's relevant. I don't need a reply though, it's not urgent stuff. So, I've really struggled with the sense of who am I for a long time, trying to work through it without a lot of success. Perhaps it's a bit like with art, how I see other artists finding their thing while I struggle to settle in any particular area. To some degree, I also feel like I keep losing pieces of myself over time, maybe as I lose interest and am disappointed by more and more things I try. The way I've come to see my problems with my sense of self seems to fall into 3 main areas. The first area is a disconnected sense of self over time. I know that we all grow as people as we go through life, but for some reason I just look at past versions of myself and feel very detached, almost like I disown them. I first noticed this feeling when I was maybe 10, and by the end of high school I'd started drawing gravestones in my sketchbook with the years that I'd felt past versions of me had existed and then died out. At some point I stopped keeping track of dates, but I still get much the same feeling. I've written about it before as seeming like I'm a character in a video game, and every so often someone else will take the controller with a different attitude to how to play it, but in the game world I'm still the same person with the same basic skill set and dialogue options, etc. I can tell what I'm experiencing is an illusion because it's just a gradual change followed by hindsight sort of thing, rather than me experiencing an abrupt shift, but it's something I find unsettling nonetheless. It's bothered me enough that when I used to try writing paper diaries, I'd read them later on and then tear out the pages because I couldn't identify with what I'd written anymore. It's only since having social media, YouTube and Facebook, that I've mostly stopped doing that, because once someone else has seen it, deleting it won't really stop it from existing in someone else's memory. But I do really struggle to watch my old videos, including some I made only a few months ago, because it feels so awkward and I keep feeling surprised by past me. The second area is a disconnected sense of self across situations, including moods in brackets with an asterisk. Again, a very normal thing where we all tend to behave differently in different situations, work versus home versus with friends, etc. But I seem to be a little too aware of it and feel like I don't have any real control over slipping into these different modes, even when it might actually be self-sabotaging. Where it causes me the most trouble, though, is when two different situations clash and I struggle to reconcile the different modes as if my brain's run out of enough RAM to run two separate programs. The clearest example is when I'm trying to make videos. These days I pretty much cannot do this if anyone else is home or if I don't know when they're going to return home. I have a YouTube voice and I feel really uncomfortable having anyone in my real life hear it. I actually also feel a bit uncomfortable about the idea that people who know me sometimes watch my videos, but I've gotten to a point where I can handle it as long as they don't watch my videos when I'm around. As a side note, I've also noticed a distinction even between my video blog persona and my fashion review persona, which is a weirder one for me because I make both video types on my own, but my brain still treats them as different situations. I also can't demonstrate how each persona acts. I can only speak like that if I'm actually making the videos. Another frustrating clash is when I need to make a phone call and use my phone voice. I almost always have to be in another room to other people to do it. Perhaps the only crossover I can think of that currently doesn't bother me so much is when I'm at work and I have the way I talk to my boss, but can also slip into retail mode if I need to help a customer. Okay, the asterisks. The moods issue might be slightly different, but I lump it in because situational pressures can sometimes suppress a bad mood enough that I almost forget what I've been feeling until I have breathing space again. If I need to be in, say, fashion review mode, I can almost always bulldoze over a bad mood to be able to make the video and say the same kinds of things that I would even if I were in a good mood. The only evidence I'm struggling is in between segments where I drop out of filming mode. I've sometimes edited these bits into bloopers for my Patreon, and it's jarring for me to watch next to the final video. What's important, though, is that I don't feel I'm being dishonest while I'm filming. I don't feel I'm being dishonest while in filming mode, even though I can drop so fast back into being depressed. Let me read that one again because I stumbled over it. What's important, though, is that I don't feel I'm being dishonest while in filming mode, even though I can drop so fast back into feeling depressed. I'm not sure how to explain it, like my brain can compartmentalize really well. What does seem to be different about mood modes is, unlike situational modes, they seem to have a bigger impact on how I remember things. I'm aware depressed people tend to recall negative memories more easily, so I think it's a bit like that. But it also extends to what I mentioned about struggling to recall what a feeling was like unless I'm actually experiencing it. I think trying to explain what I'm feeling could be a challenge in therapy because, of course, I go into a therapy mode and it's like I get a mental block on some things like that. It still took me by surprise to leave the clinic today and feel a shift in mode as I went to get lunch. Okay. The last area where my sense of self goes awry is the one that I feel most sensitive about. I'm still not sure of the right way to describe it, but I've taken to calling it an imaginary split personality, a bit like how kids have imaginary friends, except that I'm in my 30s still experiencing it. I think it's probably a result of trying to pack away the parts of myself that I saw as unacceptable as a child, not necessarily because I didn't like them, but because I might get in trouble for certain thoughts or behaviors, and I was actually paranoid about mind reading back then until I learned it didn't exist. I'm not sure quite when the sense of separation started. It seems to have been quite early, but maybe became more defined around puberty, and I was definitely aware of something by the time September 11 happened. There's a lot to say about how it's impacted my life, and I'm probably downplaying it a bit out of defensiveness, but I guess that makes sense if it came out of a fear of being exposed, ... I'll just write dot points because it's a bit too difficult to write properly about. So, this is a defined character, separate from the more normal modes I go into, and relatively persistent over time despite occurring intermittently. I'm aware it's not real, but most characters don't realize they're not real, except Deadpool, so in my head it thinks it's real, if that makes sense. I have slipped into the character on occasion, but I don't have memory loss or blackout, so it's not dissociative identity disorder, and I'm aware of the controversy surrounding that anyway. And I'm still able to stop myself acting on unwanted impulses in that state of mind. I used to humor it more when I was younger, especially after leaving high school, because when I was suicidal, it seemed to be the only part of me that still wanted to live, so I figured I'd just go with that and try to find some kind of outlet that wouldn't get me into trouble. It's had a big impact on choices I've made in my life, including aspects of my darker fashion, style, and heavy music, learning to death growl, etc. It can be really preoccupying when it's more active in my mind, can impact My decision making and sleep involves intrusive thoughts and impulses, but I don't hear voices. On the other hand, one night recently I was in a depressive spiral that only stopped when I slipped into this character instead, who is texting me. Let me start that one again. On the other hand, one night recently I was in a depressive spiral that only stopped when I slipped into this character instead, which was surprising, although it doesn't seem to be something I can rely on and can ultimately be pretty tiring. I experienced some confusing physical symptoms alongside this phenomenon. The easiest to describe being a stronger sensory experience of the world when slipping into that state of mind. Since then, some other stuff. Okay, try and focus, stay on topic. For a while, I found some of the experiences of the real vampire community relatable, even though I never joined or believed their philosophy. My first relationship encouraged it a lot, to the point that my ex has seen me in that character and was able to identify it on site with high accuracy. For a while, I had a labeling system for the more distinct pieces of myself that I identified at the time, including a piece of me in charge of handling intimacy that no longer seems to exist. At one point, I tried to merge the pieces of me, taking inspiration from the DID of integration fusion, but it ultimately didn't work out. I didn't raise it with any professionals during my big depression from 2015 to 18 because it had gone away before then, and I assumed I'd finally grown out of it, and it was just one of those youth things I'd made up and convinced myself of all these experiences. I'm not sure what caused it to come back later in 2018, but that's when I finally realized maybe I hadn't been making things up after all. But after confiding in my friend name and talking to some of my online friends, I decided it was probably healthier not to humor it, and maybe it'd just go away again. But it hasn't, and instead has returned to a pattern of fading out for a few months before suddenly coming back again. Most recently, it seemed to go away sometime between leaving therapy late last year and getting my schizoid personality disorder diagnosis in January, but then returned early May after I binge-watched Moon Knight, which has some heavy split personality themes. In the past, there didn't seem to be any particular trigger for it, but these days it's more likely to happen if I watch something with strong duality or in a conflict theme. Although I'm more likely to watch those if it's already flared up, so I can't always be sure about causality. These days, it's usually strongest at night when I'm alone, perhaps because that's when I can let my guard down, but if I let myself slip into that character, mostly I just end up frozen for a bit until it either passes or my night routine autopilot manages to get me to bed. I've also talked about it... I've avoided talking about it in a medical psych context in the past due to a fear of being dismissed, but also a fear of being taken too seriously, and because of the bad experience trying to raise the subject with my first psychologist in 2007. No idea how to explain it. Thought about OCD, intrusive thought obsessions, or autistic special interests, but I don't have either condition. Could be something to do with schizoid fantasy preoccupation, but those are usually all internal worlds. Have heard of schizoid personality disorder being described as on the schizophrenia spectrum though, so maybe a very mild psychosis or delusion, but I know it's not real, so that doesn't fit either. And that's the end of the dot points. I hope that gives a good idea of things. I feel like I've written way too much, but I really don't know what's important, what's not. I haven't gone into this much detail with my GP, but she's told me it falls generally under dissociation. I guess then it's probably also trauma related. The only other thing I can think of is having a Japanese name and that everyone pronounces differently, and that I took a long time to get uncomfortable. Let me start again. The only other thing I can think of is having a Japanese name that everyone pronounces differently, and that I took a long time to get comfortable saying myself because I couldn't decide which way to use. There was a time in my life where I could work out where I knew someone from by their pronunciation, so I've never been attached to any particular way, and not even my mum uses the proper Japanese. I'll basically respond to anything that's close enough, like when Cha Time misheard it as Nicole, so that's my cup name now if I get asked. I wonder a bit if not having a real attachment to my own name might have played a part in me not having a well-attached sense of self. I guess it could be a lot of things. And that's what I wrote to my psychologist. It is 2,299 words, although it might have changed a bit as I've just censored things and, made some corrections and whatever. Wow, that took a long time to read. Anyway, so one of the reasons I don't use scripts on YouTube is because I know that like it makes me speak in an unnatural way, and it's very jarring, and yeah, you know, I stumble over words and I don't want to have to edit the crap out of things. Like I've seen how, I think, was it Hank Green made a tutorial, or one of those brothers made a tutorial on how they do it, where they script it and then they have all these edits, and I just can't be bothered to do that. And I'd rather just speak, and I don't know, I don't want it to feel unnatural. I don't want to be overproduced, and also the time that takes to make a script. Anyway, so I'm probably going to like watch this back and just be like, wow, the way that I read. And I think maybe when I started reading that, my voice was a different pitch or something, and then once I settled into the reading mode, it sort of went into that lower, like, la 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 la. Yeah, so there's reasons I don't use scripts. And also I like going on tangents. And while I'm reading that, like, I tried very hard to just stick to what's written. But there are things that have changed, and, you know, my brain wants to perk up and just, like, interject and be like, hey, yes, that was written in May. Something's different here. So, yeah, things I should go through. I don't know. Anyway, so it's that third. Okay, I'll try and summarize. The 3 ways that my sense of self is messed up is I have a disconnected sense of self over time, so past versions of me, and that's something that I still experience, and maybe that's one of the things that also adds to derealization, because yeah, just like it does feel like being a video game character, and you know, video game characters often have set responses, and sometimes you can change, like, you know, you can select between 3 different responses, but you know, you can't make up a new one just because you're a different person playing the game. So like it does feel a bit like that, the video game thing, and so, you know, if life feels like a video game, then it doesn't feel real as well. Anyway, so I was meant to be summarizing, not going off onto another tangent. Okay, so the 3 ways that my sense of self is messed up is I have a disconnected sense of self over time, past versions of me. And then the second way is across situations, which could include moods, or maybe bulldoze over moods. But yeah, home me, work me, on camera me, in therapy me. And this is one of the reasons I didn't want to do telehealth psychology, because if I'm talking to a camera, that's one mode, but if I'm talking to a psychologist, that's another mode, and having 2 modes at the same time is confusing. And also, if I'm trying to be open with the psychologist, I don't want, like, the YouTubey talking to a camera version of me to mess up, like it's just one more version of me to worry about. Like, if I just have therapy me, that's the only thing I need to overcome to be able to open up to my psychologist. But if I have therapy me and YouTube me or camera me, that's 2 things I have to get past to be able to open up to my psychologist. It's just too much. So, yeah, that's why I need to be there in person. Yeah, and then also opening up to a therapist can be really difficult sometimes. So I think having that ritual of getting on the bus, and, you know, that time, the travel time, and then I can be therapy me, and then there's more travel time, and I can go back to being home me. And here's me again, going into elaboration mode. So, if I start again, the 3 ways my sense of self is messed up: a disconnected sense of self over time, a disconnected sense of self across situations, and then the last one, which is the one that's most like DID, dissociative identity disorder, but I don't have memory loss, so I guess more like partial DID or OSDD, which I think 1B is probably the relevant one under that categorization. And that 3rd way is the one that's hardest for me to be open about. I guess because it's the weirdest, like, you know, a disconnected sense of self across time and across situations. Those are both seem to be exaggerations of things that are normal, because we all change over time. So, of course, like, how we were in the past is going to be different to how we are now. Just for some reason, I notice it more, and I have a disconnection. Like, I don't really feel the sense of continuity in the right way. Like, yeah, my memories are all fine, as far as I know. I mean, if I didn't remember something, I wouldn't remember that I didn't remember. But yeah, I'm pretty sure my sense, like, you know, my memory across time is consistent. But when I look at past versions of me, it just feels very strange. And I'm like, was I really like that? Even if people around me don't necessarily see changes all the time. Yeah, and then the thing about different situations, like everyone's like that, you know, you kind of have to act differently in different situations. Like how you are with your friends is not how you're going to be at work when you have to be very proper and get your job done as opposed to relaxing. But it jars me in terms of like looking at myself. And then depression also making you think differently. That one's always felt weird too. I think like there was a period of time where I might have categorized depression into that third sense of self issue where like I'm actually splitting things a bit more. But that one's a bit of a gray area, I think. And I probably fits more into the situational thing. But yeah, the sort of split personality thing. Um, you know, like, so there's all those points I just read out. There's probably more things I could say, but I don't really want to right now because it's enough to just like say this stuff, and you know, some people from my real life could be watching. And I think though, because I've like had periods of time where I have been more open, probably more people know that this is a thing with me than I'm currently able to admit. Like, it's probably not that big a deal. But it just makes me uncomfortable. And I think, as I said, somewhere in there, like, you know, because it's probably compartmentalizing the less acceptable parts of me, like, there's a defense involved in that. So, of course, I'm going to feel insecure. And then, of course, mental health stigma, but that never really bothers me that much. I'm pretty open about, you know, I have a lot of issues. Anyway, so, okay, so I'm just skimming through it again to find those bits that my brain wanted to go on tangents or update things. And, yeah, so the first thing is in the sense of self being disconnected across situations. I mentioned about how slipping into different modes and not having control over it can be self-sabotaging. And so an example of that would be like I'm talking to someone and, you know, they've got all this positive energy and I will offer something that I don't really want to do, but it's just sort of like in the moment, and I can see myself making this offer and going like, don't make that offer, and then I do anyway. So you know, like offering to help do something or take on some extra project that I don't actually want to do, and like I'm watching as I do this. So I guess this is a bit of a depersonalized thing. Yeah, that's one of those examples. Speaking of depersonalization, sometimes I'm making these videos and I'll just have a moment where I'm watching myself make the video, and that's weird, and it's, yeah, trying to focus on doing things. Okay, I'm gonna keep looking through. Okay, so the thing about making videos when people are home, I'm trying to get better at that. I'm going to be live streaming, well, the day that I'm filming this, I'm live streaming later in the day, which you'll have already seen by the time this goes live. But yeah, I've told people around the house, I'm gonna be doing this thing, don't walk in. And you've seen some live streams where people have been around and I've just been like, don't come. I think for some reason, live streaming, it's easier to do that when people are around, and I don't know why. But yeah, making these set little videos I can't do when people are around the house. So I guess the thing that's slightly changed is I'm getting better at it, but only when I'm live streaming, and I don't know why. Okay, so the bit where I say, you know, I'm uncomfortable about the idea that people I know sometimes watch my videos, but I can handle it as long as they don't watch them when I'm around. That's still true, but also I kind of don't always want them to bring up the fact that they're watching, because that then I have to think about, oh no, this person might be watching. But it's variable. I think that kind of depends on my mood, and it depends on what video they're bringing up and how they approach it. So yeah, things are changing a little bit on that. Okay, so in the points about the imaginary split personality, the third way that my sense of self is screwed up. I mentioned confusing physical symptoms and said the easiest to describe being a stronger sensory experience of the world. Another thing is also like, you know, physically, I think there's some upper body, I don't know how to explain it, like some kind of a tension. It's not really tingling, it's not really tension. I don't know what it is, but there's something that changes in my body as well. And so I've mentioned in other videos how my psychologist wants me to do like a body scanning thing to try and like scan where in my body I'm feeling emotions. And I mentioned before how I'm finding that really hard because usually, you know, if I'm really upset, I'll be too busy being upset to think, oh, I'm supposed to do this thing for psychology. And so by the time I think of it, most of the feeling has passed and I can't really identify where things were happening. And yeah, so the one thing that I can identify is when I slip into this other state of mind, I can figure, like, you know, I can feel in my body where that is happening, and that's like the only time that it's really obvious and that it doesn't take any effort for me to figure out where that's happening. Oh gosh, yeah, the real vampire thing. I should talk about vampires again at some point, but I don't even know where to start. Okay, another update is where I said it's usually strongest at night when I'm alone, but because I've like now talked to my therapist a bit more about it and have been trying to pay more attention to different things and trying to understand it better, I think it's become more frequent but perhaps less intense on average. But there have been days where, I don't know, like I've been at the studio by myself and things have gone a bit funny in my head, and you know, it had a heavy influence on some of the art that I've made. Patreon has seen some of this stuff. Yeah, so it's not just at night, and sometimes at night it's just not even an issue. So it's kind of changed a little bit, you know, in the past 5 months since I wrote this. And then yeah, that last bit about, you know, my name, not having a strong connection to my name, I totally actually forgot about that being a possible reason. And something I also noticed is when I'm thinking about the reasons, I'm actually kind of repetitive, because, like, you know, this is 5 months ago and I'm still thinking, oh, it could be psychosis, or it could be schizo things, or it could be this or that. And I've been going on the same thing in circles for a while, and that's kind of frustrating. Like, I've forgotten that I was thinking exactly the same things, and so, wow, that's annoying that I've been repetitive. Anyway, yeah, so there it is, the three ways that my sense of self is kind of screwed up. It's, one, the sense of self across time, disconnected, doesn't feel right. Two, the sense of self across situations and moods, maybe. And then three, the way that's a bit more like the dissociative identity disruptions. And yeah, so I think I feel a little bit less awkward about it at the moment because I've been making a lot more YouTube videos and talking about more stuff and alluding to it more. Maybe that's helping. Maybe also, like, I'm just getting more comfortable with the idea that maybe I do have some kind of issue that is worth talking to, you know, a specialist about, or I don't know. I'm trying to be less awkward about it. And so yeah, that's what that is. That's what's been going on in my head for a long time, and things that I struggle with. And yeah, I'm just gonna end the video because I don't know what else to say, but that's kind of a thing for me and how I think about stuff. There are other notes that I've written for my therapist. Maybe I will talk about them, but I think I need a little bit more time before I'm going to feel comfortable. For example, revisiting the ways that I used to categorize myself. Long-term viewers of my channel will remember how I used to categorize, yeah, the different pieces of me, especially once, you know, I met my ex. That was difficult. Yeah, and then, you know, I don't know if I want to talk about my attempt to try and fuse everything together, because there's some things within that I don't really ever want to talk about, but, hey, these are problems for future me. So I'll see you in the next video.